Hey folks, before we get started in this sermon, I want to mention to you that it's important that this sermon and this form of instruction is not your primary form of instruction. It is important for you to be involved in a church. Being involved in a church where you can receive preaching and teaching, but also the fellowship with one another. And so if you're not a part of a church, I really want to encourage you to get hooked into a church, and I think you'll find that you'll receive so many blessings by being part of a group of people that are seeking to honor God as they live this life. Having said that, let's go ahead and get started in the sermon today, and I do hope you receive a blessing from it. Let me share a quote that I ran across, last week, somewhere along in that time. It says, "Our society is marked by an indistinguishable discontent." The reason this kind of stuck in my mind, leave it up there just for a minute, Carla, was that about 3 or 4 weeks ago in a sermon that I did, I made reference to the fact that sometimes we kind of get into a deep hole, and it looks like there's no light at the end of that tunnel. And I mentioned some things that what puts us there sometimes. It could be a sickness, it could be a loss of a loved one, could be a rebellious child, could be a marriage that's falling apart. And then I made the statement that maybe it's all of the above. Maybe you're just not content. Maybe you're unhappy with everything that's going on in life. Well, that week I got an email from our former youth minister, Jeff Kimberly. And Jeff mentioned that he wasn't planning on listening to the sermon, but he went ahead and listened to it, and he wanted to thank me for it because Jeff has kind of been going through a tough time of really finding where God wants him to be. And even the job he was in, he was kind of struggling with, and he just said that he just felt so discontented or so uncontented with life. And so when I saw this quote last week, I realized that probably applies to most of us. The concept of contentment is tough. I think we all would like to be content, but it's just not an easy thing to do. The Bible talks about contentment in a couple different scriptures. In 1 Timothy, do I have that, Carla? It says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, we take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that." This makes contentment a virtue. It puts it in line with that good characteristic of generosity or kindness or a hard worker. Contentment is considered to be a virtue. But then look at what Hebrews says about contentment. "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, 'Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you.'" This makes contentment a command. This is a directive by God that we are to live content lives. Now, most of us would say, yeah, that's true. We need to be content, but we're not very good at it. And we struggle with it. And maybe not in every area of our life, but in different areas of our life, we struggle with this concept of contentment. And so I thought, you know what? I think this is probably a subject that applies to all of us. So what we're going to do is over the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at this concept of contentment out of the passage in Philippians chapter 4. And so I've entitled the sermon today, Contentment Part 1. I've worked a long time on that title, so be happy that that's what I came up with. So I want you to go to Philippians chapter 4, and let's read through our text. Again, we're going to spend 3 weeks on this one text. I know that doesn't seem possible, but it is, and you'll understand why. But I do think that this is something that all of us need, if not all the time in our life, often we do. The ability to be content in every circumstance, every situation. Philippians chapter 4, starting with verse 10. Paul begins by saying, "I rejoice greatly in the Lord." Now, stop there just for a minute. Look, the book of Philippians is a gratitude book. It is a letter that Paul is sending back to the church at Philippi, expressing his gratitude towards them. Most of the letters that Paul sent back to the churches had some correction in it, some rebuke in it, some strong teaching in it. Not so much the book of Philippians. There was something different about his relationship with this church. And so the whole book is a gratitude book, but this section here especially, that's why he starts the way he does. "I rejoice greatly in the Lord. That at last you've renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you've been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, right? That's not easy to say. We're content when it's sunny. We're content when the water's coming in the doors because it's raining so much. He goes on to say, I've learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Now, that's a section we're going to kind of look at today. But let's keep reading. Verse 13, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. Yet it was good for you to share in your troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I first set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you gave me aid again and again when I was in need. Not that I am looking for a gift, but I'm looking for what may be credited to your account. I've received full payment and even more. I'm amply supplied now that I've received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing God, and my God will meet all your needs according to his glorious riches. Now look, in this text, and it's interesting, I don't know that I ever really thought about it this way. Paul says, look, I've learned how to be content. And so, even though I've studied this passage before and I've preached on this passage before, it didn't dawn on me that the elements of how to be content are in this passage. Most of the time when I've taught it before, I'm looking at all these other characteristics that you find in Scripture in Paul's life about contentment. But then it kind of dawned on me that doesn't even make any sense. If you know very much about basketball, let's say you're a basketball fan or a baseball fan, doesn't matter, a sports fan, and you've got a star player at the college that you cheer for, and a new freshman comes in, has been offered a scholarship. If that new freshman goes up to that star player and says, look, how are you so good? I mean, what is it that makes you such a superstar? And if he says, look, I've learned how to get the most out of my abilities, you would hope that he would tell his fellow teammates what that secret is. What is the key to getting the most out of your ability so you can be a star player? Well, I began to look at it from this point of view. If Paul's going to tell us I've learned the secret to contentment, he's going to tell us what the secret is. And so he does in this passage. He gives us 6 different characteristics or elements that lead to contentment. And so we're just going to kind of take them as we go along. We might deal with a couple this week today, maybe 2, maybe 3. I don't know. We'll just kind of, as we walk along and keep a check on our clock. But that's why this will kind of take us 3 weeks to work through. All right. Before we begin to look at the elements, let's understand a couple words that are used here. The word content actually means self-sufficiency. Now, that seems like a strange word for Christians. We don't teach self-sufficiency. No one is self-sufficient. We're all dependent upon Christ. But self-sufficiency means I am satisfied, I need nothing more. That's what Paul is saying. I am satisfied, I need nothing more. Whether I have a little, whether I have a lot, I don't need anything else, I'm self-sufficient. The word learn, though, is intriguing too. Because learn means that it's not something that comes naturally to us. Something that is learned is something that we have to try to understand and then put into practice. The Stoics believe that contentment was learned by developing what I would call an apathetic attitude, where you just learn to say, I don't care. So they would teach you that you would take a kitchen utensil, a cup or whatever, and you'd break it, and you would just say, I don't care. And eventually, if you did that enough, then if a pet dog or cat or a horse or whatever it was to be injured or killed, you would just say, I don't care. And then you would be able to come to the point that if you got hurt, you would be able to say, I don't care. And eventually, you would get to the point that even someone that you loved, someone that you cared about the most, if they got hurt or even lost their life, you would be able to say, I don't care. Well, look, the problem with that is that takes passion out of this contentment, and Paul was a passionate person. So I don't think this is an apathetic type of concept that Paul is teaching. He's teaching us how to learn to be satisfied, the keys to be satisfied no matter what we face day in and day out. How we're able to say, I'm good, I'm okay, I'm taken care of, I don't need anything else. You want to give me something else, fine. If you don't, okay. I don't need anything else. But because it's learned, it requires discipline. It's not going to come natural for us. And especially in the world that we live in today, contentment doesn't come natural to us because of what we're being bombarded with and what you need, what you have to have in this world to survive and be successful. But it's a discipline. It is an ability to say, I am satisfied, whether I have little or whether I have a lot. A few months back, there was some sort of a series, TV series, I don't even know who it was by now, about Vietnam. Maybe some of you all watched it. And so I taped it and I would go back and watch it. And during that time, I would also read a little bit about Vietnam. And I ran across some testimonies from some POWs. And they were talking about just how horrific it was in the prison there in Hanoi. But they said what they learned was this, that within a matter of a few hours, once they were put in the in the prisoner camp there, they had to develop this attitude. And that was, I have to adapt. I can't complain. I'm not going to whine about isolation, about the food, or even about the beatings. I have to adapt, otherwise I'll be broken. And so they developed this discipline to be able to say, we can make it. Well, that's what it means when it comes to contentment. It's not something that's going to come natural for any of us. You have to be able to say, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to apply these elements to my life so that I can be content in all circumstances. All right, so let's look at the first element. The first element, in order to be content, is to have confidence in the providence of God. Look, if you would, at verse 10 again. Paul says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you've renewed your concern for me. Indeed, your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. Now, look, it's been 10 years since the church in Philippi had helped Paul financially. And so 10 years later now, they send him a gift. We don't know what it was. Could have been money, could have been food, could have been clothing. But 10 years later, they send this gift. And Paul says, look, I know you didn't have opportunity to be able to help me before now. Now, we don't know why they didn't have the opportunity. They were a very poor church, very, very poor church. Could have been they just didn't have the money or have the resources to be able to help him. Second of all, they might not have known what his need was or even where he was. Listen, this was not during the time and age of technology and social media. It wasn't, hey, this is where Paul is. He's hanging out in the prison in Rome. They don't know that. And by the time they get the information, it could be that he's already gone from there. They don't really know. But whatever the reason, Paul says, look, you didn't have the opportunity to be able to help me. Now, here's where the kicker is. He goes, but I know you were concerned. See, Paul doesn't say when he gets the gift, hey, where have you been for 10 years? You know, what's happening? I could have used your help long before now. He doesn't see it that way. He says, look, I know you wanted to help me, but you weren't able to help me. All of a sudden, Paul is saying this, I know that God is in control. I know that God's hand is in this. I don't know why you didn't have the opportunity, but I know you wanted to help me. So all I know is that God didn't give you the opportunity to be able to help me. Paul understood that contentment comes from recognizing that God is in control of all things, that his hand is involved in all things. We call it sovereignty. And as I mentioned to you a few weeks back, look, there's only one other doctrine I think is more important than the doctrine of sovereignty, and that is the doctrine of Jesus Christ being the Son of God. You need to understand he's the Son of God. He died on the cross. He was buried in the grave. He was raised 3 days later. That is the most important doctrine we will ever teach at this church and that you will ever grasp. But I think the second is the sovereignty of God. Until you catch the sovereignty of God, that he is in control of everything, you will never be content. Most of life will beat you down if you don't realize that God is in control, that he is sovereign. Paul understood that. That's why he was able to say, look, I know you didn't have opportunity. That's okay. I know that whatever it was, God didn't want you to send it, and that's okay. Now he has, and I have it, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Look, folks, I got to tell you right now, when you grasp the fact that God is in control, it is the most freeing thing you will ever experience in your life. The stress and anxiety just goes away when you realize God is in control of everything that is happening in your life and in this world. It just goes away because, first of all, you realize he can do it a lot better than you can do it. The control that you try to have is nothing compared to how good his control is and what he's trying to accomplish. When I was in high school, I put together a softball team for my home church. And so I did all the legwork and met with the city of Orlando and got all the stuff that needed to be got to get our team. And then we got the team together, and then I would take a call practice. I would run the practice. And then when the games came, I was the coach of the softball team, and I enjoyed it. And we had a pretty good team. Went to Bible college, and the only team they had then was a basketball team, and we were terrible.
but I played on it. I loved it. I enjoyed myself. But after about 3 or 4 years, I thought, well, I wonder if I could put together a softball team for our college. Now, I'd love to do baseball, but baseball's really expensive. And the college was only about 5 years old, so I thought, well, maybe we can do softball. So again, I got all the information, had tryouts on the team, called the practices, ran the games, enjoyed myself. We had a great team. In fact, we won championship. First championship that the school had ever had was that softball team. Well, about 2 years later, I went to my first full-time ministry was in Stone Mountain, Georgia. And when I got there, they had a softball team. And they had a coach by the name of Chris Huber. Became really good friends with Chris. He's a great coach. He was really good at it. He was a lot better than I was. It took me a little while to learn that. Because when I would go to the games and that kind of stuff, I still got this coaching in me. And if he did something I didn't like, I might say something. But then all of a sudden I realized, you know what? He is so much better at this than me. All I have to do is go to practice and then go to the games. And it was so much more enjoyable. I had such a better time playing on that softball team than when I coached for my church and then I coached for the college. That's the same concept. When you are able to come to understand that God is in control, let Him take care of it. And that everything that happens in your life, He's involved in, it becomes so freeing that you're content with whatever it is you're facing, whatever it is that you're going through, whatever struggles that you might be dealing with at that point. Now, let's understand how God's control works. And I think that this is really important for us. There are two ways that God accomplishes His will. And please understand, He's going to accomplish His will. We've talked about this before. There's the revealed will of God, which is His Word. And in there, He has told us exactly certain things He wants for us, how to treat people, His relationship, our relationship to Him, how He expects us to deal with money. That's all in here. And He gives us free will to decide whether or not we want to follow His revealed will or not. But then there's His sovereign will. And His sovereign will is His accomplishing a specific purpose or an ultimate purpose in your life. And He's going to accomplish it no matter what. And nothing's going to keep Him from accomplishing it. The problem is with the sovereign will of God is we don't always understand what He's trying to do and even how He's trying to accomplish it. And we don't have to tell Him. Or He doesn't have to tell us. All we have to understand is He is in control. That's God's sovereign will. Now, here's how He brings about His will in your life, His sovereign will in His life. He can either do it through miracles. Now, miracles are where God suspends nature and He supernaturally involves Himself in the world to accomplish something within His will. And it's not anything that we can explain. It logically doesn't make sense. It has nothing to do with nature. Then there's what's known as the provision of God. The provision of God, or the providence of God, is where God uses nature. It's where He uses the normal in order to accomplish His will, in order to bring you to a certain point or bring something into your life. And He uses just the everyday things of life, and He manipulates it, and He moves it, and He directs it where He wants it to be so that He is going to accomplish His will in your life. So let me give you a couple examples. I would encourage you this week, read the book of Esther. Read the book of Ruth. Read the book, or read about Joseph. In all of those situations, what we read about is the providence of God. In fact, think about Ruth just for a minute. Nowhere in the book of Ruth do I know of where there was a supernatural miracle that took place. But I see God's providence all throughout that book. A couple of examples. On one occasion, Ruth just happens to end up gleaning or working in Boaz's field. Just happens to be in this field of this Christian godly man who is very wealthy. Just coincidence? No, the providence of God. It just so happened that the day she was working there, Boaz shows up at that field. He's probably got 50 fields, but he shows up at that field and he sees her and he says to his workers, "Who is she?" And they go, "We don't know, but she has been working all day long." And he goes, "Man, I love her. Just luck. Just luck." No, the providence of God. He was moving things around in order to get Ruth there and to get Boaz there, for His ultimate will was for them to be married and to have children, and eventually it would come through the line of Jesus. It was God's providence at work. Let me give you another example. Something very dear to me, and you all know this, is my eyesight. Now, I don't have very good eyesight, and I haven't had very good eyesight for years. I began wearing contacts at the age of 12. And I've told you before that some 36 years ago, I had a detached retina in one eye. They put a buckle on it. It was a 4-hour surgery with 5 days in the hospital. 3 or 4 years ago, you might remember I had a detached retina in the other eye. They put a buckle on it, 45 minutes in the hospital, and you go home. How is that possible? Well, the providence of God. The knowledge that we have now in order to accomplish that kind of surgery comes from God. We didn't have that knowledge 36 years ago, but in God's providence now, we do. Then, about a month ago, I go to my eye doctor, and she's my annual checkup, and she says, "Good news, you have a cataract." I said, "Good news?" Now, all I know about cataracts is what I've heard other people have had in the past, my mom and that, which is a film that gets over your eye that kind of makes it cloudy and a little bit yellowy. And they go in and they suck and clean it up and you're able to see. And I said, "Why is that good news?" She said, "Well, because now they can actually take a lens that has your prescription and implant it, and your insurance covers it." That's a miracle that the insurance would cover it. Well, maybe it's the providence of God. Maybe God now has given us the knowledge to be able to do that. And so I said, "Good news, I'm ready for it." I got to tell you, the day of my surgery, Lisa and I were in the waiting room for about an hour and a half waiting to go back. And I don't know how long the surgery was, maybe just a few minutes. But I got to tell you, as I'm sitting there, I'm having some doubts because I'm pretty comfortable with not being able to see well. I mean, you know, I know how to do my contacts, and they don't hurt me, and I can't read that wall, but I can read this wall. But I'm going, I don't know, this might change everything, and I actually begin to have doubts because they were going to do something a little bit different in the surgery where they fixed my stigmatism, and I almost thought about before I went back there, hey, don't do that, just get rid of the cloudiness, and I'll just continue to wear the contacts. Well, I didn't, because they said, look, this could really improve your sight. And so the day after my surgery, I'm seeing the best I have seen since the age of 12. Lucky? Coincidence? No, the providence of God. For some reason, for over 30 some odd years, God didn't feel like that I needed to have perfect vision. But now he thinks I do, at least in one eye. In August, I hope to go for the other eye and have it done. But that's how God works. Nothing's luck, nothing's coincidence. It's providence. It's God's providence. Sometimes it's a miracle, sometimes it's a providence. I think most of the time it's the providence of God because he uses nature, he uses the things that were just normal, and he directs it in order to accomplish his will. Now, folks, you got to catch this truth. You need to realize that you will never be content until you know that God is in control of everything. And no matter what you're going through right now, God is in control. See, Paul understood it this way. If God wants it to happen, it'll happen. If God doesn't want it to happen, it won't happen. Now be careful for a minute. Let me give you an example. It's one of the best illustrations I've ever heard. It's in the book entitled Trusting God by Jerry Bridges. Best book I've ever read. And in there he uses an example. Let's say that at your job, you got a guy that just doesn't like you. There's a coworker who doesn't like you. And he's complaining about you. He's telling lies about you. He's going to the boss. He just ripping you up. Now, what Jerry Bridges says is this. If God doesn't want you to get fired, you're not getting fired no matter what that guy says. But if God wants you to get fired, you're going to get fired. Now, let's back up for a minute. Let's not be too quick to blame God for everything. If you happen to be a jerk at work and you don't do your work well and you steal and you come in late and you're mean to people, listen, understand, if you get fired, don't say, oh, it's God's fault. That doesn't always work that way. You're breaking God's revealed will. God has told you how you are to be a good Christian worker. But outside of that, whatever happens, God wanted it to happen. And whatever he doesn't want to happen, it's not going to happen. And that's the confidence that we are to have, that God, through either miraculous works or the providence, is going to accomplish his will in all things. And who better to do it? Perfect in wisdom, unconditional love. I'd rather him have control of my life than me have control of it. The second thing that Paul mentions here, or God mentions through Paul, is that contentment comes when you learn to be satisfied with a little. Now, this is the good news part of this text, because Paul says, look, I've had stuff and I haven't had stuff. I've been poor where I've had hardly any food, but then I've had enough stuff that I'm hanging out at Five Guys every day. Paul understands, and that's good news for us because we're not being taught here that contentment means that you're not allowed to have anything. That's not what we're being taught. We're not taught here that contentment means that you're not allowed to have possessions. It's not bad to buy a bigger home. It's not bad to buy a newer vehicle. I got to tell you, this really bothered me this morning because some of you might not know, but a couple days ago, Lisa and I bought a new vehicle. I needed a new, not new, but new to us. But and so I'm thinking here I'm going to get up and talk to you about be content, don't have stuff. Oh, look, let me drive around with something new. And so I felt really bad about it. But then, look, that's not what he's saying here. He's not saying that you can't have a nicer home or a newer vehicle or go on a nice vacation. That's not what he's saying. Here's what he's saying. If you don't learn how to be content with little, you will never be content with a lot. And that's where our confusion is. We think, if I can just get this job, if I could just buy this house, if I could just lose this much weight, if I could just do this, then everything would be fine. But no, Paul says, look, I learned to be content with little because if you can learn to be content with little, then you will be content with much. If you're not content with little, the more you get doesn't mean you're going to be content. We've all heard the statement that John Rockefeller said when he was asked the question, how much is enough? And he said, $1 more. I didn't know this, but John Rockefeller, based upon what his income was, how much he was worth, and the economics of the nation at that time, today he would be worth $345 billion, 4 times more than Bill Gates. And yet he said, all I need is $1 more. Because that's how it works. If you're not content with a little, then you're not going to be content with a lot. If you learn to be content with a little, then if God blesses you with a lot, you'll be content. So I love this. I don't know why I love it, but I like it, is lottery winners. I mean, most lottery winners are not content. I don't know if you know that or not. There was a study done by some economists who wrote an article in the U.S. World Today, U.S. News and World Today, and he said, look, most people that win the lottery think their financial problems are over. They actually get worse. And on the average, they file bankruptcy in 5 years. So I ran across some specific examples. Bud Post won $16.2 million in the Pennsylvania lottery, only to later to wish that it never happened. That's because his brother hired a hitman to kill him. Other relatives made him invest in businesses that never paid off. And Post spent time in jail for firing a gun over the head of a bill collector. He declared bankruptcy in 2006. Callie Rogers, who won $3 million at the age of 16 in the UK, used her money on vacations, cars, gifts, drugs, and even breast implants. And by the year 2009, she was driving a used Volkswagen Golf to her job as a maid and twice attempted suicide. Billy Bob Harrell out of Texas, he won $31 million in the Texas lottery. Harold purchased a ranch. He bought a half dozen homes for himself and other family members. He and his wife and all the kids got new automobiles. He made a large contribution to his church. If the members of the congregation needed help, Billy Bob was there. Then suddenly Harold discovered that his life was unraveling almost as quickly as it come together. Everyone had seen, family, friends, fellow worshipers, and his lending was spiraled out of control. In February, those tensions splintered his already strained marriage, and tragically, 20 months after winning the lottery, he committed suicide. Jack Whitaker of West Virginia, already a wealthy businessman, when he won his lottery of $314 million, he had a chain of awful events that followed. His car was broken into twice, first with $540,000 in cash stolen. Who puts that in their car? $545,000. I guess if you got $314 million, that's like $20. I don't know, but anyway, he did. Later, there was $200,000 stolen in his car. He needs a car that you can't steal. I don't know. There was a plot revealed in which 2 club employees had planned to drug his drink and rob him. His granddaughter's boyfriend was found dead in Whitaker's home for overdose. Whitaker's granddaughter was found dead at a male's friend's house after being reported missing. Whitaker had a DUI. Whitaker was sued by the Caesars Atlantic City Casino for bouncing $1.5 million worth of checks to cover gambling costs. He eventually said this thing. He made this statement: "I didn't like what I have become. Look, these are just examples of what Paul is trying to say. If you don't learn to be satisfied and content with a little, you will not be satisfied when you have a lot. And we always see it differently. If I can just get that one more dollar, I'll be fine. No, the key to contentment is learning to be content with little. Now, the problem is the world that we live in. See, culture is calling the shot right now. They're telling us what's important. They're saying that the ultimate goal for anybody is to have your needs met. That's what they're trying to convince us. That the meeting of needs is the most important thing. Do everything you can to meet your needs. Paul understood that the greatest and ultimate goal for him was to worship and adore and love Jesus Christ. But if we allow culture to call the shots, if we allow culture to determine the needs, we will never be content. Do you realize that the whole purpose of TV is to get you to be dissatisfied with what you have and to do a flip-flop, to convince you that your wants are really needs? So that's where the problem is. Commercials are the main purpose of television. It's not the television shows. It's commercials. Because if you don't buy the product, what do they do with the television show? Take it off the air, put something else on. Not enough people are watching it. So the whole purpose of television is culture telling you what your need is. And most of the time, what your need is really a want, but culture has convinced you that that's a need. Someone one time said, I need things I don't even want, because culture has turned it around. So I asked you all this week, I said, look, shoot me off some of your favorite commercials. So I've got a couple I just want to show you. Go ahead and play those.
Okay, what color is the grass? Green! Good. What color is my sweater? Blue! What color are my teeth?
Beige, off-white, stucco, ecru, mother of pearl.
No matter how great your smile is, don't you wish it could be whiter? Now it can. New Colgate Sensation Whitening fights cavities while whitening your teeth.
Let's try this again.
New Colgate Sensation Whitening from Colgate, the choice of today's dentists.
Xfinity presents the Swapsons.
Man, streaming is way better with Xfinity.
This Wi-Fi is so fresh.
Get it, Nana?
Oh, yeah.
Go, Nana. Go, Nana.
So, your seat good? Get the mirrors all adjusted? You can see everything okay? Just stay off the freeways, all right? I don't want you going out on those yet. Just leave your phone in your purse. I don't want you texting.
Daddy, okay?
Okay. There you go. Be careful.
Thanks, Dad.
Call me, but not while you're driving. We knew this day was coming. That's why we bought a Subaru.
So look, these are things you need a Subaru so you can pass on to your kids. My dad would say, I'm not passing nothing on to you. That ain't a need. You're not getting a car. You're going to get your own job and get your own car. But it's a need. You got to have white teeth. My favorite is Xfinity. Because, look, everything about Xfinity is we need faster Wi-Fi. Now, I'm trying to figure out why I need that. Well, so that you can stream movies. Okay, look, if I'm in my house with faster Wi-Fi, I'm not watching movies on my phone. I got a TV I'm watching the movies on. I'm not streaming on my TV or my computer if I have a big screen TV. So I don't know why I need faster Wi-Fi, but that's what I've been convinced is I need faster Wi-Fi, because what I do on my phone that I need Wi-Fi for and on my computer is I check my email and I text, and I need the fastest Wi-Fi that you can get for that. I've been convinced that's a need. That's what society does, what culture does. They say, you've got to have this stuff. You need to buy it, when actuality it's a want. I have one more. It doesn't really apply to this, but I really thought it was kind of a cute one that was sent in to me. Go ahead and play that last one for me, Carla.
I'm going first. No, you're not. You went first last time.
Why are those lines on my floor?
A distance contest. I already made it from this line.
For life's bleachable moments.
You got to love that one.
I'd like to thank Chris Dorman for sending that one in. You had to know it had been Chris. That was the one that he sent in. So, look, you understand the point that I'm trying to make here is that the reason that we struggle with contentment is because we haven't learned to be content with a little. And if you don't learn to be content with a little, you'll never be content with a lot. You think you will, but you won't. It's interesting. If you're not content being single, then you won't be content when you get married. And if you're not content with you're married, you're not going to be content when you have kids. The contentment takes place back here, and then as God blesses you, you continue to have that contentment. More things doesn't bring the contentment. It's understanding that Jesus Christ is Lord of all, that He's the King of all, that our ultimate purpose is to worship Him and allow Him to take care of us. It's funny, you can almost imagine people saying to Paul, Paul, man, you're in bad shape, man. You got nothing. You in prison, you're chained up. Paul's going, I thought I was in pretty good shape. I got some bread, I got some food, I got some clothing, I got a place I'm staying. Paul learned how to be content with little, and then when he was blessed with abundance, he was able to be content. I love the story about the man that comes into the minister's office. He's been going through a bad financial time, and he sits down. And he says, "Preacher, I've lost it all." And the preacher said, "I'm so sorry." He said, "I'm so sorry that you've lost your faith." And the man said, "I didn't lose my faith, preacher." He goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you lost your character." I goes, "No, preacher, you're not listening to me. I didn't lose my character." He said, I'm really sorry you lost your salvation." The man goes, "No, preacher, I didn't lose my salvation." The preacher said, "If you didn't lose your faith, you didn't lose your character, you didn't lose your salvation, then whatever you lost doesn't really matter." I think sometimes we forget that contentment is being satisfied of what we have, or even what we don't have, because God's in control. The Puritan one time, as he sat down to a meal of a little bowl of soup, a little glass of water, and a piece of bread, said, "All this and Jesus more." It's amazing that we forget what satisfaction is, what contentment is. It's a discipline, though. You have to make a decision that this is what's going to happen. I'm going to be satisfied with whatever God gives us. Last thing I want you to see is this. Paul was content because he didn't allow circumstances to affect him. He was independent of the circumstances. You read about his circumstances. Sometimes it was little, sometimes it was a lot. But either way, the circumstance didn't affect him. Now, I think this is probably our greatest struggle. That when we find ourselves in situations that we would refer to as trouble or hardships or difficulty, we oftentimes lose our contentment. We're not happy with what we're going through in life. Look, Paul would have been the last person we would have made as the poster child for Christianity because of all that he went through. In Acts chapter 14, we read about how he was dragged out and stoned and dragged outside the city, left to die. In Acts chapter 16, we read about how he cast a demon out of a little girl, and when he did, the owners of this little girl who were making money off of her dragged him down to the officials, and they stripped and beat him. If you go over to 2 Corinthians chapter, I don't know where it is, 11, 12, somewhere in that neck of the woods, maybe 12, he lists all the things he'd gone through. He'd been beaten 5 times. He'd been stoned 3 times. He'd been in shipwrecks. Everyone was out to get him. He lists a whole group of people, all list of people that were out to kill him. And yet Paul was able to say, look, you know what? I'm okay. The circumstances does not take away my contentment. The circumstances does not take away the fact that I am satisfied with what God has given me. Have you ever heard anybody make this statement? If you walk up to them and say, "How are you doing?" and they say, "Well, I'm doing well under the circumstances." You ever heard that said? Yeah. You know what? Christians should never be under the circumstance. We should never be under the circumstance. We're above the circumstance. We live above the circumstance. The circumstance does not affect us. How do you live above the circumstances? Well, it means you got to turn your eyes towards what God desires, towards the spiritual things, towards heavenly things. Isn't that what Jesus said in Matthew when he says, look, seek first the kingdom of God, and then everything else I'm going to take care of. I'm going to give you enough clothes. I'm going to give you enough food. I'm going to give you enough drink. If that's all you have, be satisfied with that. If I give you more, be satisfied with that. But look, if you're only concerned about the circumstance, I can't get through this.
I got a child that's just driving me nuts. I can't get through this. I've lost this loved one. I can't get through this because I'm always worrying about this sickness. I can't get through this because I'm always worrying about the bills. You're under the circumstances, and as long as you're under them, you will never be content. We have to address our tension above it. Look at what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says, for our light and momentary troubles, go back and read that 2 Corinthians chapter 12. There's no way it was light and momentary what Paul went through. But he said our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Paul was not under the circumstances. He was above them. The circumstance could never take away his contentment. Ever. Didn't matter what he was facing. Because his purpose was not to meet his needs, but to love and worship and adore Jesus Christ. And if I do that, and I know he's in control, I can be content. I want to leave you with a quote. I really like it because I made it up. Contentment means you understand that the totally infinite, supernaturally resourceful God will never leave you or forsake you. That's contentment. Whatever you need, whatever he wants to give you, that's good enough. Next week, we'll move a little bit further in our text. But I would encourage you that this week, take a look at your life. Does your language indicate that you're not very content? Does your attitude show that you're not very content? I don't think God is telling us that we're not to have a drive and seek excellence. But I think what he's telling us is that we cannot allow our desire for things, our desire for this situation, to keep us from worshiping God. Contentment comes when you know that he's in control, that whatever he gives me, no matter how little it is, I'm satisfied, and that there's not a thing that's going to happen to me in this world that's going to put me under the circumstance, because I'm going to live above.